We are now being recorded.
So I guess, I don't know. Hi, welcome everybody to the Sustainability Oversight Committee meeting for September. I can't believe it's September. Shall we, do we have anyone in open forum? No guests, right?
Nope.
How about we review the minutes?
Yep.
Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Oh, there's Steve.
Did everyone get a chance to look at them?
Yep.
Any comments?
No, everything looked fine.
Okay, do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Yes.
Second.
Mm-hmm.
All in favor?
Yeah.
Yep. All right, and I think Brian's trying to get in to the waiting room. He's in the waiting room.
Here we go.
Welcome, Brian. All right, so any announcements before we move to our guest? Or should we wait? I guess why don't we move to our guest? We have a special guest, Tom Snyder from the Seneca Park Zoo, is going to talk to us about pollinators.
Oh,
Yeah. Am I right to share my screen? I have a couple slides. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see if it lets me. Oh, it's got to be enabled from you down on the bottom there, whoever's the host.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm a old Zoom pro at this point. While that's being done, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Nate reached out to me and told me that you all were interested in some plantings and native pollinator plants. You know, anytime that I can be an ambassador for that and try to create more habitat for some of our native pollinators, I'm always game to do that. So I appreciate the time. I'm still not allowed there. If you click the up arrow on the share screen button on the bottom,
Yep.
it should have some advanced options, and then there's a button in there when you do advanced options that it'll say allow all participants or something like that to screen share. And if not, that's fine if you can't find it.
I am not seeing that option.
No worries. I don't. They're just pictures of flowers and bugs. So to jump into our project, it's really all centered around the Butterfly Beltway project that we have in the zoo, and I'm Director of Program and Conservation Action for the Zoo Society, which we are the nonprofit partner in the zoo. We are partnered with Monroe County Parks Department. So the Zoo Society, being the nonprofit partner, is everything from fundraising to education to the gate to all of those things, pretty much anything other than animal care, animal health, and facilities and maintenance, to give you a background on what our role is. In 2003, we started the Butterfly Beltway program, and at that point in time, it really was exactly what it sounds like. It was meant to have these small little pocketed gardens created throughout the area that were stopover spots for specifically monarch butterflies. Somewhere along the line that kind of trailed off, and it became a pretty garden type of thing where really conservation and native species was not the priority. I took it over in 2015 and recentered the mission of the project to really look at native pollinators and native insects and plants. In 2017, we had partnered with New York State DOT to look at some of the right-of-ways along I-390 down towards the Mount Morris area. And through some negotiations really with the state DOT, we found that it was budget neutral for them to modify the mowing enough that the milkweed would seed out in the fall and we could actually start propagating native plants on some of these right-of-ways. And I will say, you know, you all are in the local government, you know, the budget neutral gets the ears listening at least. And so that was a good lesson for me. Out of that, we won the New York State Environmental Excellence Award with that partnership. And got an influx of interest from different states, from different DOT regions, New York State Parks, DEC, a lot of organizations here locally. And what I realized was at that point in time that there was really this vacuum for looking at ways to take some of our neglected areas or the underused public spaces that we could harness some of these plantings and seedings and different things that we could do in order to specifically for the zoo's mission to conserve species, but also to do programming on site at these areas. And, you know, we have about 400,000 people visiting the zoo per year, and we get out and talk to about 120,000 kids every year. So locally, we really have a good need to, you know, really get out and do this type of programming around that and to engage kids in experiential learning. It works great whenever you have these pollinator plots around. So in 2017, we started really looking at how we could create more habitat and how we could increase our footprint exponentially. Up to that point, we had created about 300 gardens locally. Once we started to look at it on a larger scale, within a year and a half, we had created over 100 acres of native planted habitat or reclaimed habitat area. And again, these were budget neutral type projects that were funded with soft money. They, in some cases, were projects that were specifically meant to use native grasses to mitigate brownfield problems. Native grasses are inexpensive. The roots go 25 feet deep and they suck all those heavy metals right out of the soil in a very cost-effective way. We started looking at local agriculture and apple orchards and cornfields and different things that rely on pollinators and really looked at how we could up production just through planting, you know, a 2-foot wide row around a certain field, and that ups production by up to 30% on some of these fields. You know, so from my standpoint, it was really interesting to see how we could come at pollinators and some of the pollinator habitat from a bit different direction than just aesthetically trying to make something that was pleasing. And, you know, what we found was the ecosystem services that they provide are well worth the value of putting them in. During all of this time, we have an institutional partnership with RIT. So we had multiple years of the bio students doing capstone projects that looked at everything from how many species does our seed mix actually bring in. And to give you an idea, the DOT mix that you see alongside the road supports roughly 27 native insect species. Our mix, that is our true prairie mix with all the species in it, supports over 520 native species. So when you look at the biomass that you can create with that, it's significantly different than the mix that you can go pick up in Home Depot or something like that. That being said, it's not as inexpensive as, you know, like $10 a pound, like some of the Home Depot stuff is. And there are some definite costs depending on how you get into this, how quickly you want it to come in, what your expectations are for growth. You know, there's a lot of things like that. What the soil type is like, what the shade is like, what the water retention in the soil is like. So there's a lot of variables that we try to come in and get your outcomes that you're looking for, and then morph what we need. For instance, a corporation, a GM plant out in Lockport wanted an acre of pollinator habitat, and they were willing to you know, basically do a turnkey system where they brought in some landscapers. We planted the plants. We went in and did surveying and public programming around it, and they won an international award for it within about a year and a half for corporate sustainability with it. That was, you know, the quick and dirty, pay for everything, top notch, and go do it. Then we have the private individuals that may have 5 acres, but are not looking to spread, say, 10 pounds of seed per acre for those areas. And we create little hot spots for them. And their expectation is that it may take 4 or 5 years for those areas to fully come into fruition and show what what they're capable of with these plants. RIT, we brought back, at this point, I think it's about 2.5 acres at RIT that were planted with our wildflower mix. And they're on year 3. They're just now getting the color that I think probably the leadership there was expecting when they said yes to it, you know, in the first year or something. So really understanding what those expectations are and framing those properly is really a key factor for the success of doing something like this in my mind. You know, when you start talking about planting native, it can be anything from a very manicured garden, you know, that looks very nice, up into a true wild space that is better for the wildlife that you're trying to attract and the biomass you're trying to attract. And that is a sliding scale with a whole lot of gray area in between. So what we try to do is when we're involved is really try to figure those priorities out for you, create a mix that's specific for you. For instance, Region 4 DEC has a solar plot, and they wanted a mix that specifically grew short and in shaded areas so they could plant those underneath the solar array. And they're in year 2 of that. And they also did a kind of a hero garden in front of their regional headquarters. So they have something that they can interpret, and then they have something that's really natural. We tend to find that satisfies kind of both ways of thinking. You have something that looks nice, but then you have, that again, has some value to it for natives, but it's mainly aesthetic and for interpretation. Then you have another area that's really truly meant just for function and for ecosystem services and things like that. You know, we've worked with some of the soil and conservation districts and worked with them on native seedings. We work with Ohio Prairie Nursery as our main vendor for it. You can either, if you decide to go with us, you can either go with us or call them up directly, and we can facilitate that discussion with them. You know, between our work with them and our local greenhouses that we work with, you know, we can really do everything from seed to plugs to 1 gallon, 2 gallon, or larger. But you know, I'm happy to either just consult with you or go full bore with you, or you know, it's really, I'm all about creating habitat, so that's what I care about, and I'm very interested right now in the empty spaces here in urban Rochester. Just a couple days ago, got a letter of support from the Department of Recreation and Youth Services. We are trying to plant those empty spots and those plots in Rochester, specifically where there is no nature and no green spaces for the residents there. So somewhere, you know, like the northeast quadrant of the city of Rochester towards like 104 and Dewey and that whole area. If you look on parkserve.org, which is a great website, if you don't know it, it shows you how accessible green spaces are to where you are. And if you look at that area, there's absolutely no green space within like a 20-minute walk for most people. And the goal is to get it down to under 10 minutes and circle around some of the rec centers that we do programs at. We also have a memorial garden going up with Habitat for Humanity later this year and into next year to celebrate their 100th house. But we are doing a memorial garden for Tyshawn Caldwell, the young boy that got killed in, I think he was 2001, I think now as well. It was quite some time ago. But you know, that's really using biodiversity to show symbiosis and things like that. So I like to dig deep and interpret those and get people thinking when they're on that space. And that's a general overview of what we're doing right now. We are a part of a national network of zoos and aquariums that have a program called SAFE, which is Saving Animals from Extinction, and that specifically looks at the monarch as a keystone species. You know, so we have a whole lot of literature, we have a whole lot of resources. There is money available for joint fundraising for this type of stuff as well. Specifically, if a town is looking to get involved, that makes it a little bit easier. Things like environmental justice grants and you know, beautification grants can go under this as well. And we of course would, if that's the route that you all decide to go, would be happy to explore that with our development department and see what we could do with you. And that's a quick overview. Hopefully I didn't fly through that too quick for you.
What was that? You said there was a the green space. There was a website or a link.
ParkServe.
What is
It's
it?
ParkServe. And I believe it's .org for the end of it. It might be .com, but I believe it's .org.
It's Park Search.
ParkServe.
Yeah.
SERVE.
Yeah.
And that's one of those resources that was probably grant. Yeah, there you go. And you can punch in your zip code or your city. I'm not sure if Brighton specifically is on there. I know that the Rochester is.
Right. Huh.
That should get you.
And do you have? Is there a link on the Seneca Park Zoo site that talks about your work?
Yeah, if you go on senecaparkzoo.org and just search for butterfly beltway or butterfly or crazy conservation guy.
Okay.
Yeah, you can go on there and it'll be under probably conservation maybe. We just redid this, yeah, in the community. I think it's in the community under that. And if you go programs down to Butterfly Beltway, that's where you reserve camps and programs. Yep.
Great.
Yeah, and basically, so if there's interest, we go through and just collect, form data, and then we'll call and consult. The majority of our early clients were businesses, mainly locally, that wanted a little small garden. We have moved much more into, we're consulting with Kodak right now about bringing some of their lands back to native here. Coca-Cola is another one that we're currently talking to. I'm really interested to see how we can bring pollinators kind of on the edges and the fringes, some of those areas that we don't really necessarily need to mow, or the, like RIT is prioritizing all of the high risk mow areas, right? So the areas that are at whatever grade or more, they're planting those right now. Or doing a survey for the students to see what type of space the students want. They're also currently doing social surveys, which I find really interesting, right? Is, are you happier with this manicured look of industrial, RIT, or are you happier with a bench around these pollinating insects? And overwhelmingly, it was more nature that all the students were wanting to be there, as long as they weren't getting stung by bees, which tends to be the thing that turns most people off to any of this. But bee education is really big on that too. I will tell you, in my 15 years of work, I had my best day last year when I was at one of the rec centers downtown and got every kid to actually hold a bumblebee, because they thought that thing was gonna just sting them into next week. They had no clue that they don't have stingers and they aren't gonna sting them, So it's those small things like that that really make me feel good about this project. So.
Hey, Tom, quick question. Has the monarch been officially listed on the endangered list? Do you know?
No, I would expect it probably won't at this point. I think we'll, depending on what happens, in November, we'll probably either see a decrease or increase of things going on it again. I think that the thing that really impacts monarch is this such a small area that it overwinters down in Mexico. And currently, I get updates all through the year, so I know right when they leave Mexico and they're coming up, and they currently have some major problems with drug cartels in that area, and so in a whole lot of ways we it's kind of out of our hands. So all we can do is just provide the habitat. The nice thing is that because this is a keystone species in those areas, when pollinators, there's so many other native pollinators that are important as well. What I will say, one of the first things that surprised me when I took over the project that really was the big bummer for me is we used to do monarch releases. And in order to do monarch releases, what we do is basically purchase from like a greenhouse that creates monarchs. But what they were doing was taking the Florida monarch, which is non-migratory, bringing that to Pennsylvania late winter, breeding that, sending those up to us. And by the time we got them, not only were they a non-migratory monarch. So we were putting non-migratory animals out where the migratory monarchs were. But we were finding that because this was almost like an industrial farm or agriculture, we were finding the parasite loads were getting higher and higher and higher as we did this. And unfortunately, we had to put several shipments down because we couldn't justify doing that. And after about a week or two of that, it was like, nope, we're stopping this. And without a doubt, that significantly impacted revenue for this project. But the mission is creating habitat. It's not doing monarch releases. So that was definitely an eye opener for me. And working in conservation, it's always layer after layer after layer of complexity. It's not just that top superficial layer. So
It seems as though the educational component, it's like, oh, a butterfly bush. Well, guess what? That's not a pollinator, and there's, there are only, a handful of plants in this area, native, that are truly pollinators. I just read Doug Tallamy's book, and he just kind of goes right through it. And it just seems like that educational component, besides just obviously getting out there and doing what you're doing is fantastic. But the educational component is key, it seems.
It's a lot like our lawns, right?
Right.
Pre-1950s, they were all clover, and clover is a whole lot better for pollinators. And then, a couple industry leaders marketed to us that it should be a nice, well-kept, lawn, grass that's this species, and now that's what we all have. And that's really, it really for us, it's all about the planting of the habitat, but then the knowledge, to your point, Paul, that that it may not matter that you're not putting chemicals on your lawn because the neighbor 5 houses down is doing it, and that's still affecting your lawn. So there's natural ways to do that, and natural mosquito and all of those things that you can do, and they're really accessible now. So to your point, that public education piece is really important for sure.
Tom, would you, what would you say the first steps would be for Brighton? How could you help us take the first steps along this path?
Honestly, with the times that I've talked to any governmental organizations or institutions like RIT or some of those that have quite a few layers and checks and balances that really make you prioritize, 1 or 2 really important things. To me, if this is the route that you would want to go, then identifying the risky spots that are mowed is a way for you to say, all right, there's a health risk for our workers to do this mowing in this area. That tends to be something that your facilities and maintenance people don't like doing anyways. And that tends to be something that is the lowest bar that I find. And in that regard, then you can get that aesthetic prettiness. It can be wild because you're not necessarily growing an 8-foot grass and that, you're planting it properly. So you can get a little color and you can make it look good, and it's a buffer area in a park or something like that. And those tend to be the things that I see that the decision makers say, yeah, that makes sense. I can do that. If you went in and said, hey, we want to take over 20% of every park and, or something like that, it's not going to happen. Right. So, making sure that it fits within your master plans and that it's, works to beautify and do what everybody and all of your committees, really care about. That tends to be the best way to start in my mind. And that area that can be a risk for human safety is something that people tend to say, yeah, okay, we can try it there. And definitely having some sort of signage for public education. And I would offer the same that we do with any of our clients or partners is, we, at one point before we tore down the front of the zoo, we had something like 1,146 signs on site at the zoo. And let me tell you, you get really good at writing those in concise ways that people pay attention instead of these long diatribes after a while. So we would always offer to assist with that as well, if need be.
Thank you, Tom. Is there a fee for consulting with you, or how do we go about collaborating with you?
No, I would be happy to sit down again with a couple people and talk about it. If there's a space somewhere over the next meeting or two that says, hey, the zoo, if you want to do this or do some programming, or we find a way to, you know, come on and do some public programming or something like that, then we can talk about a fee. But I would never charge just to consult and see what we can come up with.
Great.
Yeah.
That's the right answer, right?
It's the right answer, particularly given our budget situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's that way everywhere right now, right? I mean, we're operating about 20% of our revenue or somewhere around there right now.
Tom, just real quick, the reason I asked about the endangered designation is because about a month ago or so, we received communication from New York State DOT and Cornell University about potential regulatory impacts or changes to municipal mowing operations, et cetera, or projects with regards to pollinator habitat and all of that. And I wasn't sure if you were familiar with it, or it sounds like there were some changes coming down the line in December. And
Yeah, I haven't had the chance to be up to date on a whole lot of that stuff this year. We've been doing what I imagine you all have, which is putting out fires for about 5 months now. So I'm just now starting to get caught up on some of that stuff. I do know that both you know, DEC and at the state level did a directive, and I think they published that in 2018 maybe. I can find that and forward it for sure for you. And I know that Obama, you know, did a directive as well, or I don't remember the exact language on what he published, but that was trying to get the thought of a monarch highway from, you know, here in the Northeast all the way down to Mexico. And so what I saw when all of that came out was the organizations like DOT all of a sudden were interested, right? Because the higher ups of the higher ups told them, hey, be interested in this. We did just do a webinar in May for every region of DEC that we talked a whole lot like I'm talking to you now, but it was more structured about here's the process to enact planting pollinators throughout all of the regions of DEC. So I can tell you without a doubt, it's definitely kind of meandering and getting itself into all the crooks and crevices of the governmental agencies at the state level and federal level. I'm not sure what money is available federally anymore. What I will say is that as I look at the species, one of the things that our IT did was actually create a pollinator network for us on everything. You know, Paul was talking about what's actually a pollinator plant and whether it's a nectar or a host plant or food plant or any of those things. We created not a full, but a very complete, almost complete pollinator network for that. And we have several endangered and threatened species of New York native insects that use the species that we plant. So there's definitely a direct tie to those things that you're talking about, Ever. But you know, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the monarch for sure, as this all goes down.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is so interesting, and I feel like it ties into several different committees of the town. Right, like I just thinking of the conservation board and the beautification committee, right? And so this is something we should keep in mind as we're developing our climate action plan, and we don't have to wait for the climate action plan. We could think about what are those risky areas, and then ultimately try to gather some data. I think it would be helpful of the cost of the planting versus the opportunity cost of not mowing, right?
To give you a bit of a scale, right? I mean, obviously a native grass seed is quite inexpensive, right? So you're talking maybe a few to $10 per pound, something like that, even less. When you get into our really, you know, that prairie mix that has everything in it, it's $136 a pound. It's, like I said, it's up there. And if you're looking at 10 pounds per acre for coverage, now that is literally like a prairie in a pack, though. That thing will really go crazy. But that's the two ends of the spectrum that you're looking at, and then anywhere in between we custom mix that. So we have, I believe now, 7 or 8 different individual mixes that we use. For instance, the urban empty lots that we're looking at, You know, in an urban area, you don't want an 8-foot grass that's very thick, right? It just shouldn't be in an urban area like that for many reasons. So we create a low grow mix for them that only goes up to 3 feet, you know, and so those types of things that you look at use case give what you were talking about, Aaron, is if it is a beautification committee, they're going to want something that's beautiful, right? Not necessarily wild and crazy. So, yeah.
Tom, is there a way, I was talking to Caitlin Static, Whitney at RIT about this, and she was mentioning that her capstone project was looking at carbon capture.
Yep.
Was she doing that work with you, or do you do that on your own, the carbon
No,
capture?
that was with RIT. That was Caitlin was our advisor or professional contact or whatever they say for the capstone project. This year we actually are not moving that forward because of you know, RIT is not a huge bio school, right? So
Yeah.
they tended to always have just a few people in those classes. And with COVID, it was just too much and Caitlin moved over to a different department. And so we were taking this year off. We're going to come back to it next year. But that's a 5-year capstone. So to give you an idea of some of the things that we've looked at, with that class and Caitlin's class in particular, we've looked at everything from, you know, all right, we know milkweed is native to this area, but if we buy an Ohio milkweed seed and plant it here in New York, is it really truly the same milkweed? And so that's a St. Olaf study out of Minnesota that we're a part of with Caitlin's class, and looking at that, and the early data shows us that yeah, it's the same plant. There's a little bit different ability to defend against insects because insects are different geographically, but overall that's really it. So her partner in the class with us was Christy Tyler, and Christy's doing a partial study that's looking at salt tolerance in some of these too. Right. So if you have a road that's heavily salted, that runoff over time is getting into your water supply somewhere, you know, is there a native grass that we can plant that can soak up that sodium and salt and keep that from going to the water? That's infinitely less complex and less costly than you know, putting infrastructure into that place. And so those are the types of things that I'm interested in. Yeah, just go spread the seed and you know, give it a year or two and it'll start mitigating. Like that's the perfect solution for small towns, right? You know, so then we're looking at urban to suburban. You know, does it matter with white clover if it's planted in an urban area or a suburban area as far as how much it's actually pollinating and helping out the area? You know, so we've got plenty of lines on that. And you talked about carbon sequestration. The associate provost at RIT teaches an economics class that is doing a cost benefit analysis of modified mowing techniques for planting native pollinators compared to a manicured mow. You know, and of course, if you have a 7-foot wide deck and you're flying up and down a football field, that's way different than what I talked to you about earlier, where you have a human risk, right, on this little small area. So it's incredibly fascinating to me how much is coming out of this, and specifically how much RIT is working on this. And we've got an urban ecology program that's workforce development that we are training kids to take rec center kids out to these areas. So it's really grown into something that I'm just truly enjoying and seeing grow.
I have a question.
Sure.
When you say the cost for the acre, does that include soil, or is that additional cost for tilling and stuff like that, getting it to?
That's the seed mix. You know,
it's really, part of the seed mix?
No, it's just the seeds. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that tends to be something, right, that you really have to think about if you're doing this on a large scale, is how are you prepping that area? I know that, you know, Nate, if you know Caitlin, I don't know if you know Enid Cardinal and sustainability, but she's a part of this as well. And so she was one of the key contacts that I had in getting this seed mix into her hands. And before she could even do anything, they went out and did herbicide over like an acre of land, right? And so she's pulling out her hair because here we are trying to do a sustainable action, and facilities as maintenance is trying to wipe their hands of it and get it done. You know, so really having a well thought out plan, getting the right stakeholders in the room that are going to take part, and realizing what expectations are. You know, it's a whole lot easier on some of these small areas to lay down cardboard, say, you know, so it kills the grass beneath it. Throw some old topsoil that you've got maybe in a mulch pile somewhere in one of the town barns that's been sitting around for 10 years or something. Throw that down, throw the seed mix down, and walk away. And that's really how we do a lot of it in the urban area. The cardboard is something that's easy to get. You know, it's all over the place. The mulch tends to be something that most places have laying around, or a business has laying around, that's too degraded and that they can't sell it for soil, but they can't sell it for mulch. And so that would be what I would expect, that if you all wanted me to come back and do some sort of next meeting, we could start looking at those ideas and drive around and look at places and throw some ideas around, and you know, what's truly possible, what's possible under this budget, or things like that.
And Brighton does have a lot of low-lying areas with a lot of water. So do you
Yep,
make
yep.
this-
There's an aquatic that will actually pull that up, and when you start looking at some of the native grasses, the water absorption that they can bring in can actually mitigate some of those flood areas as well. I don't remember the name of the road going into RIT, but the one closest to the hotel there, that's actually low as well and has some water issues there. So we planted some of ours around the water area, and then some of the native grasses to soak up some of that water, and it's started to work already.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Tom. I had a question regarding code, zoning and codes. Right now, the town is fairly rigorous in terms of requiring that people maintain their grasses at a certain level. Do you have any experience with towns that have kind of eased those lawn maintenance codes so that we can encourage private residences to kind of grow this type of habitat?
That's a great question. No. I mean, the majority of our people that are residential that do it in a potted area or a raised area or some sort of area that's moved off, right? And then the other residential people that do it are out kind of in the middle of nowhere, that have a couple acres and are just kind of sick of seeing, you know, a non-native grow, or want to do something like, you know, what I talked about earlier. So no, not really. That would be very interesting. And if that's something that you're all interested in discussing, I'd love to be in on those meetings and talk about that. I think that's a really interesting thing that I haven't ever had to think about. So yeah.
I mean, I've seen it in other municipalities, none in New York State, but definitely in California, I've seen it where you know, they kind of ease some of those codes. And I saw some really beautiful habitats develop. You know, one yard looked like they had transplanted an English prairie right into right onto the lot. And so, you know, I've seen it work quite nicely.
Yeah,
of course, you always have to balance because.
Right. And really the key to that, and let me tell you, the head of the GM plant was not happy when he saw what we created initially, because you know, he was thinking that manicured space, and what we were told to do is create habitat that'll get biodiversity in, you know, so there was a bit of a miscommunication from the leadership there. But really, you know, you do things like hard edges and you edge something properly, and then that wild becomes manicured, right? So there are those small things that you can do that can give you the wild look while still being something that, like, you know, a traditional homeowners association or something wouldn't worry about, because it looks like it's supposed to be there.
Right.
Robin, are you familiar with are there situations where the town has come down on folks that have a large garden in their front yard?
I know of grass is overgrown, and that's it.
Yeah,
I don't think
grass overgrown is one thing, but I think, you know, pollinator gardens in the front yard,
what I do know too is sometimes that, you know, people want chickens or something like that.
Well,
That could be a problem, right?
Chickens aren't a pollinator.
Well, no, for sure, but no, I haven't heard of anybody with a pollinator garden and specifically having a problem.
Right.
But I could also see how somebody could make that argument, and you all know that if there's an argument to be made, somebody will make it. I'm sure you know that.
Exactly. Well, I know just from a personal standpoint, my husband had often said, I would love to, not have to mow, 1.5 acres. I would love to,
Me too.
have some of that go fallow and like,
And to be honest with you, one of the most surprising things to me is when we went to that modified mowing with DOT, we came back in the very next year, there were already native flowers that had started to move into the area just by changing your mowing practices, right? And so we literally had them mow a month earlier in spring, or like 3 weeks earlier in spring and like 3 weeks later in fall. And that was all they had to do. And out of that, the milkweed seeded out, the plants started coming back and propagating. And then unfortunately, the same thing we see in multiple spots of this is that some facilities guy that doesn't necessarily know what's going on mows over everything right once, and it sets you back a year.
Right. No, but just along those lines, I love the new initiative by Color Bright and Green to have the little signs for people who have, no pesticide lawns. And I think that just that, people being made aware that, hey, this lawn does not look unkept, but, they're not putting pesticides on it.
That's why I yelled at the guy that used to be ChemLawn that's now True Green. I said, there's nothing true about it.
Right. Yeah. So just having, slowly the return to, native grass.
And I really love the thought of the organic growth of that coming back, right?
Yeah.
So I'm truly not about like, hey, let's come in and spend $1,000 per acre to get this seed in, and like there's something really wonderful to me about letting it do it in its own natural way, right? But the expectations need to be really laid out for that to work.
Right.
Hey, Paul, just to kind of follow up on Robin's point there. I don't know of any specific situations, but we do get quite a few email complaints or phone complaints about unkept or unruly kept yards and front lawns. And without the education there, I can see somebody thinking maybe, these types of plantings maybe are not properly kept and all of that. And I'm sure we will get phone calls, but it's just a matter of education, kind of.
I can send you an image of the signs that RIT put up, which were very small and kind of just in an area. What that did for them was they put them right in the front of these strips that we did, and then they mowed behind them because there were invasive species in behind. And within about an hour of mowing that, the students were tweeting everybody possible at RIT, telling them that somebody was mowing the pollinator plots, even though they weren't. It was like right behind them. So it actually, that signage alone really did its job. And it's basically, it's about this big and it's got a monarch on it, right? So I mean, it's super simple. And DOT did the same thing. They actually made a DOT sign that's a monarch on it. I attempted to get these I-390 big signs that were monarch crossing, and I hit the wall trying to get that. I do know that RG&E, we talked to them as well, and COVID hit them, but we were looking at some of the right-of-ways that RG&E has around this area as well to do this. So there, as I said, if we go forward and you want to come in and talk about this deeper, there's certainly some partnership opportunities as well, where RG&E might be like, hey, we were going to do this here, but if Brighton wants to do it with us, then hey, let's look at it.
To go back to the mowing issue, the mowing timing, Everett or Robin, do we know if the town has like an official mowing schedule, or is that something that the Public Works guys just kind of do by tradition or by habit? Do we know how that works?
Yeah, Nate, it's a little of both, right? We have certain areas that we know that need to be mowed, and so they happen in X number of intervals, obviously depending on man hours, that type of stuff. So it's a combination of both. Mostly it's just we have these areas identified that we know need mowing, and we tend to get out there, X number of intervals, or so we have to get a complaint about something or something like that. Then we'll certainly approach it that way. But like I mentioned earlier, we basically municipalities have been put on notice about upcoming regulations that might impact our existing mowing strategies because of potential monarch designation. So there's this whole movement about joining this a pact of various municipalities with regards to these regulations and mowing practices that we're currently looking at.
Okay.
Any other questions? I think this has been really informative. I really thank you, Tom.
Yeah,
Thank you
definitely.
so much, Tom.
I can talk for
Thank
if you
you.
want me to keep talking about insects. I'm there. Just let me know how long I have.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very informative.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, everybody. I'll let you go, but please, Nate, I know you have my email. You know,
Yeah.
feel free to email me if you have questions. I'll see what I can dig up as far as some of the research that I have for, you know, some of the things that were done around Rochester and some of the things that the public was looking forward to in some of these open spaces, so you can see the difference between manicured and some of that, and we'll go from there.
Great.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank
Yep.
you, Tom.
Yep. All right. Bye.
Bye. Well, that was, I don't know, that was, thank you, Nate, for bringing Tom in. That was really informative. And I think we could do something very positive for the community looking into this.
Yeah. I was surprised because Mitch and I were talking about how to accomplish this, and I really thought we would kind of on our own. But there's so much knowledge in the community about it. It's really quite impressive because there's a couple people at RIT I talked to who have worked with Tom, and their knowledge is just as deep as his. And we have so many resources, including several Brighton residents who work at RIT. So if we wanted to go forward on this, I think it could be kind of exciting. We could work on the education part. We could work on the signage. Yeah, I'm really excited, actually.
I mean, the front yard component is, or any backyards, front yards. If you're not familiar with Doug Ptolemy, I don't know if any of you have read his book, but books actually. It's essentially, you know, here's what you can do in your own yard. And, you know, if we all did that, you know, here's what we would, I mean, and he's a kind of entertaining writer. It's definitely worth reading. I don't know if it's in the library or not.
What's the last name, Doug?
Ptolemy, Tallamy. I've got the book downstairs. I'll send it out to folks after the meeting.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, we're picking up a ton of feedback, Mitch. I don't know what's going on there.
Sorry, Mitch.
I think it's a great idea and it'll look really good, a nice visible thing to show some efforts. And it doesn't sound like it's going to be expensive.
I mean, it seems as though, you know, George Smith is, I think many of you know, he's been doing quite a bit over at Buckland. And I thought there was some talk, and he sends out a lot of emails about trying to develop more pollinator plantings at Buckland as well. You know, and of course we've got the expanded, you know, property there now, which is where George has been, and the town. I think Everett, you could probably speak to it more, but I know the town has been this week working on developing a new trail through there with George.
Yeah, Mike Guyon, Commissioner of Public Works, and Matt Beeman met with George recently, and they've met on site to discuss potential alignments in areas, and everybody seems to be on board and seems to think it's a really good opportunity or really good use of that land. So it seems like that project's moving forward. You know, alluding to kind of following up on what Aaron indicated, there's a bunch of different ways we can approach this subject matter. I mean, we can include it in the climate action plan. You know, we can always bring back Tom and maybe set something up with Mike on, you know, ideas or potential areas, that type of stuff. However we decide, I guess, when we want to move forward.
I think we could, if we added this to the climate action plan, it might formalize it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a lot of potential in a lot of ways, like even cleaning up the waters and things like that. So I'm all excited about this.
Yeah, and I think there's a potential for private landowners really to make a
Mhm.
big impact. Shabangi and I live along Allen's Creek, and our homeowners association has a plot of land along the creek too. And I was just thinking about um, convincing our neighbors to plant along that landscape too. That could make, a small impact, but those things add up over time.
Yes, and we could convince all the neighbors with creekfront properties to do things that will help in that direction.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess a couple questions, before we move on to the rest of our agenda. Is there any sort of, how do we take this to the next steps? Do we need to understand from the highway department, kind of what are the areas that are not desired to be mowed, right? Kind of where do we get started, and what information does the town need? And then maybe we need to do a socially distant field trip together or something.
Yeah.
Well, I,
Sorry.
I, I think besides the highway, there's also parks. And so if we're talking about Buckland, so they both kind of share the burden in terms of maintaining the mowing within the town. And I think either department, correct me if I'm wrong, Everett, would be happy to discuss, areas where maybe we could allow habitat to grow as opposed to constantly mowing, because we keep acquiring more park acreage, which traditionally has to be maintained. And so with the same amount of staffing, we're requiring our staff to maintain larger and larger areas. So maybe if we could kind of scope out the best areas to alleviate that burden, I think that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, no, Robin, I wholeheartedly agree. I think you bring up great points. It could reduce the amount of mowing that our
Yes.
park departments have to do. I think the next step maybe is we identify our existing parkland, and like you guys said, maybe take a trip somewhere, and obviously we'll rope Mike in as a commissioner of public works and gather his input and potential applications. But I don't see either department going against some of these ideas here.
And at the same time doing some education as we move along this path, because Everett mentioned we do get complaints, not just about private lots that are that have overgrowth, but also public lands. And it's that balance between maintaining our sight lines for traffic safety and also we just have to identify good areas so that we don't get those complaints.
Yeah, I can see, people expect these, parklands in between neighborhoods and all of that are typically well manicured and mowed, and all of a sudden they start seeing, growth and all of that, and I can see the phone calls just start ringing off the hook.
But education is also part of CAP, Climate Action Plan. It's one of the on the list there.
Yep.
So
I'm working with Color Brighten Green too, could help out with that.
Could we schedule the field trip as part of the October meeting? Maybe not on a Wednesday night, but we probably want to go before there's snow on the ground and then.
yes,
Yeah.
true.
Maybe what I can do is see if I can get a map, like a PDF map of all of our current parkland, share it with the committee, and then maybe we can pick a couple spots that we think maybe we want to look at and kind of go from there.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Okay. All right, so we moving on to old business. So I asked Everett to talk about a virtual meeting protocol since this is probably the way we're going to be meeting for a little while. And, you know, we haven't had a bad experience with this yet, but, you know, I just want to make sure I knew what the town's protocols were and having a virtual meeting and, you know, how do we handle a situation if we're uncomfortable? So Everett, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, the protocol that we have are basically the guidelines from the governor. For this particular committee meeting, one of the things that Aaron and I were talking about is, you know, last week we had a public participant, which is great. I think we like to see the public participate in our meetings, but we weren't really sure who you know he was or whatnot. We didn't recognize the phone number, and so I think we wanted to establish just a protocol of like, hey, maybe just saying who you are, announcing your name, and that type of stuff. And if we run into a situation where you know, something happens where we get unwanted displays on the screen or somebody saying things that shouldn't be said in public forums, what I will do is essentially just end the meeting without warning there, and then follow up with the committee as to what happened and why I ended the meeting. We haven't had, Robin, you can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, we haven't had any issues, but I've one of the consultants in the area did tell me about a situation that occurred in Irondequoit at a planning board meeting where somebody got a hold of the meeting password and just came online and started screaming a bunch of expletives and all of that. And, you know, people didn't really know what to do. They were just kind of like stuck like a deer in the headlights. And so if we ever run into a situation like that, I'll just end the meeting immediately and kind of go from there. But I think that's most of what we wanted to talk about here, and just kind of have an understanding of what would occur, right?
You want to talk about the benchmarking and annual report, the benchmarking and our annual report? Yeah, so as we strive to get back to normalcy and start picking up on normal business that the SOC is generally involved with, every year the committee submits a benchmarking report and an annual report of which outlines and summarizes activities from the previous year. The benchmarking report is a benchmarking of existing covered buildings that meet X number of square footage. And we basically just review and collect energy consumption information and compare it to the previous years. This year might be a really good exercise because we were, you know, out of the buildings for 3 months or so. And so, you know, it'd be interesting to see how that looks like in terms of energy consumptions and reductions and all of that. So we just wanted to put it on there as a placeholder to let you know that it's something that we will be picking up. I will start working on those reports and hopefully I can start sharing progress next meeting on, you know, whether it's the benchmarking or the annual report. We generally have, you know, some students or co-ops that help with some of this work, but we don't necessarily have that this year. But we do have, you know, Brad or other folks that maybe can help out. And what I'll do, I'll start collecting information, maybe bring it back to the committee, gather input and feedback, and put together reports that we can then submit to the town board. So that's all I have for that. Okay, great. And the climate action plan grant, any updates on that?
Small updates. So that's moving really slow. I did hear back from the grant manager on their questions. They had some questions on the budgetary numbers that were provided as part of the application. It's mostly related to formatting and how they want to see the grant budget presented and outlined. And so I'm working with them on updating those numbers. It's still moving forward, just very slow moving. And hopefully we'll make our way through, but not much of an update, just that it's moving forward, it's moving slowly. Yeah, that's pretty much what I have on that.
So should we go into development updates?
Sure, yeah. This will be very similar to last month. The winter farmers market. I don't know if you guys have driven by, but there's been quite a bit of activity over there. Utilities going in, new RG&E high voltage power lines are in. Sewer is in. Water service is in. At least all of those utilities are into the building. Currently undergoing pressure testing for the service that was installed by our sewer department. They've done a great job of just doing a lot of this utility work that we would generally contract out to a larger firm or site contractor. We've installed a section of the trail, basically connecting to the Veterans Memorial up to our property line. We have a permit from the DOT to install the new curb cuts to kind of connect where the Farish property or the Farish Trail there ends to this new market area. So kind of moving forward on that end. Some of these are kind of old, geothermal ordinances. Man, we've gotten like 2 or 3 applications every week for about a month now on geothermal. We don't have an official code or policy in place. We've kind of implemented an ad hoc policy where we're having folks submit information and fill out a permit application where these geothermals will be installed. And I'll have like a quick pre-construction meeting with the contractor and issue them the permit, but they have become a fairly common occurrence recently. Highland Park Trail, that's formally open, looks great. South Clinton, that development, I'm sure you've seen quite a bit of activity there as well. That Doodlebugs is complete and it should be open now, or they've obtained their CFO. So at this point, that at least the daycare facility is open, and they're going to proceed with the following phases early next year, I believe. HVAC evaluation, it's a project that we continue to include in our CIP, becoming more important these days with COVID and air exchanges and that type of information and data that we're looking for. So we'll keep putting it in our CIP budget and continue to push on that potential improvement. CCA, Rob and I always need your help here.
Yeah, actually there have been a few interesting developments with regard to CCA. So of course we were in the consortium with the village of Pittsford, town of Pittsford, Irondequoit, and us. So those 4 municipalities are what comprise Monroe Community Power. That's the name of our CCA. And so we had the first round of bids come in. They did not meet our benchmark. Of course, our benchmark is a historical look back, and we chose to go to bid with a 12-month look back that gave us, because the market has kind of been depressed, a very, very competitive rate for people to try to meet with 100% renewable, even though they were competing against the standard brown mix prices. So moving forward, Bill and I we're the 2 town board members who are on the CCA committee to work with our administrator. We thought that it would be best if we wanted to maintain a CCA past this 2-year point, that we should look at different benchmarking models, because the next step was to go out to bid with kind of a 24-month look back, which again, just because we're kind of comparing apples to oranges, would have been very hard for the suppliers to kind of meet that really competitive brown mix rate. So moving forward, the town of Brighton will be looking at a different benchmark. We're going to be looking at a more value-based benchmark that would establish a minimum discount off the best available retail price for the same product. So we're comparing 100% renewable rates as opposed to the brown mix versus 100% renewable. And our best pricing came in at 0.0472 cents per kilowatt hour. That was the lowest bid that we received in the first round of bidding that we had that did not meet the benchmark, which is a very competitive rate when you compare it to the 100% green product that is out there for consumers. That's at 0.61 kilowatt hour, so per kilowatt hour. So I think that we need to have a more fair benchmark. So we're basically moving forward with a benchmark model that is based on a discount off the lowest available consumer rate. So we want to go, if it's 20% off the comparable consumer rate, retail rate, then our benchmark would be at 0.0488, which again, we've already had somebody come in below that rate. So I think that, although it's probably not as low as, the 2-year look back on the brown mix, it's an extremely competitive rate, and it's also one that we can achieve a successful bidding process on. So Brighton, the town of Brighton, which is like 15,000 residential households, will go out to bid with the other municipalities, but we will have a different benchmark than the other municipalities because they have decided to stick with the 2-year look back, which was kind of an arbitrary, and as I said before, an apples to oranges kind of comparison. But we have chosen to have a benchmark that is more future looking, and I think more fair to our CCA, because ultimately, if we are going to be at very similar pricing to our brown mix, I think that we can sell that to our residents. If they're only going to be paying $3 more per year, but they're going to get 100% renewable product, I think our residents would prefer that. Whereas I don't think Irondequoit and Pittsford are quite there yet. So that's, I think, something to be aware of moving forward. We may end up being the only successful municipality with a conforming bid. And we still have enough households to move forward with a CCA. But just in case, we don't get conforming bids for all the municipalities, I just want people to be aware of what's going on and why.
Great. Any questions on that? Okay, we'll keep going then. Thank you, Robin.
You're welcome.
Townwide street lighting, we continue discussions with RG&E. There is some movement on that. I'm still very slow, but as always, there's some good news at least. Cobra Head LED replacement. We have obtained a grant to replace our street lights, our Cobra Head street lights with LED lights. So we're just moving through that grant process as well. Highway Operations Center, our garage bay light fixtures were replaced with LED fixtures. So we got that done. Rose Garden, all landscaping has been installed. Let me see. climate action plan. Just talked about it a little bit. Slow moving, but moving forward. Multiversity plan. Also obtain a grant for this project, and similar to the climate action plan, we continue to move forward at a slow pace, but it does continue to move forward. Highway management plan. This is just leveraging our GIS mapping and system for some of the things that we've talked about, such as the monarch pollinator areas. I'm going to go back to our gentleman who manages our GIS mapping system and ask for a map of all parklands and kind of help us narrow down some areas that we may want to look at and talk to Mike and highway and park departments about in pursuit of this project. So that's all I have for projects. Does anybody have questions or comments?
Do we have a timeline for the full completion and opening of the Winter's Farm Market? I'm sorry if you said it.
Oh, Nate. No, so
This is a loaded question.
by this winter, the end of the fall, kind of winter, we'll have the existing barn interior renovation completed. So it'll be a habitable building with sewer, with water, with electricity. There is some existing kind of gravel parking areas that we're kind of using for contractors and all of that. That might be useful for potential vendors, but I don't know. We won't be ready for like vendors, this fall. I think the game plan is by 2021
Okay.
to have everything completed in terms of the initial site development. Now, when we start looking at future building expansions, the entertainment area and all of that, that is really kind of down the line, hopeful, far looking. I don't know that we have funding to complete some of those other components in the site, such as the entertainment and rehabilitation of some of the other structures on site. But certainly the barn and the new parking lot, the game plan is to try to be completed by end of next year.
Okay. Thank you. I had a
Yeah, I think things kind of changed a little bit. With COVID, we lost 3-4 months here of potential construction times and all of that, but we're certainly working our hardest to make our way there.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm wondering with the Winter's Farmers Market, now that Nate mentioned it, is that an opportunity to bring in a pollinator garden or think about the site a little differently now? Because this is now a site that will probably require some maintenance, and in areas that we weren't really maintaining so maybe they were doing some mowing, maybe they weren't, but maybe there would be an expectation of mowing now that it's developed. But I'm just wondering if we could think about, particularly with the labor involved in mowing, it's the more expensive part, right? If we can reduce that, it might justify the cost of, the materials involved.
I was thinking about the same things, Aaron. You just took the questions out.
Yeah, I mean, the edges around there, and again, they, recently acquired property, to the east of that building. I think it just becomes a question of, I mean, there's grass, it's an abandoned field at this point, and it starts working into, as you go south, it starts working into that area that I was mentioning, we were talking about earlier, that George Smith is working with the town on. So it just seems like that eastern area of Buckland Park is a prime area to be considering. The difficulty is that it's it's very overgrown right now. I was out there helping George do some clearing, but I think it's definitely an area worth looking at.
That would be awesome. It would be like a example or an educational item that people can go and see what the town has done then.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's certainly some opportunities out there worth exploring.
Yeah, it would be a showcase for the town.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I was, I'm sure we've all been out to Buckland. I was there this morning running, and, the southern portion, it starts, going, sloping down. It just seems like there's a lot of opportunities in Buckland for, a different type of planting.
Yeah, there are all kinds of ecosystems where there's, wet, dry,
Right.
and then there's the birds, the sparrows, and the turkeys come in there, and it's going to be quite fascinating if we can do that. I'll be willing to help out.
Yeah, definitely got my wheels turning. So, yeah, as
as
target spaces, that would be what an ideal one. So,
Yeah.
As we're on this topic, I'm sitting here thinking, and I guess as we went through the development projects, and I mean, I just hate going down South Clinton where that daycare is, where they just totally made a wasteland of that property. And, we can talk about what we want to do on town property, but to me, the real impact could be requirements that we put onto developers as to how they develop property. I mean, it's just dreadful what the developer did on Clinton. Anyhow, it's a bigger issue. But, and it's always like, well, we don't have that much more property. Well, we do, there's all that property, all the rest of the property at Westfall and Winton Road. I mean, there's properties. So anyhow, just something to.
no, I agree with you, Paul. And again, I think I keep circling back to zoning and what we can do with our zoning code. And, if we can get some funding to kind of revisit our zoning codes, it would be nice to kind of not only contemplate our on-development plan,
Right.
which you say that there's, there might be limited amount of, but in terms of redevelopment,
Right.
I think that it's important to have our codes match our vision for the future in terms of redevelopment. So yeah, you bring up an important point.
Yeah, very good point, Paul.
Before we I think we're almost done, but were there any other focus groups that wanted to share anything, or anyone have any other thoughts for a future meeting? Okay, I'm sorry, go on.
I don't know that we need to do this because Tom was so excellent and well-spoken, but I was talking to Dr. Caitlin Stack-Whitney at RIT, who collaborates with him. And at some point, if we wanted to ask her to come speak to us, it might be, I mean, she's more on the research side of it, right? Tom is more on the practical, let's get the stuff in the ground. But I think if we go further along on this and we are actively looking at and making action, we should ask her to make measurements before we start. That's what she mentioned to me, is that she wants to measure, the soil and the pollinator count and all that stuff before we make changes, so we can quantify what we've done. So at that point, if we do look like we're making changes, then we should invite her to talk to us, or I should reach out to her and, try and set that up. Because I think that would be, we want to quantify what we've done or what we're going to do.
Excellent idea.
Great idea. So I guess, Everett, you and I maybe you'll send a map out to everybody.
Yeah, I'm going to touch base with our GIS representative and see when I can get this map out. But yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll send the map out to the committee.
And will you give a heads up to Mike and the parks
Yes,
and the
absolutely.
highway and have them start thinking about what areas, you know, that they don't like mowing or that would be appropriate areas that we could start with? Because that
Yeah.
would be useful information too.
Yeah, last month when you know, we talked briefly about this and Mitch brought it up, I think Mike indicated he certainly wants to be in the loop of how we want to proceed and what we're thinking. So certainly I will do that. Go from there.
Speaking of being in the loop, should we invite a member of Beautify Brighton committee? You know, like, should we, if we're going to continue talking about this or the next time we talk about this, this definitely impacts other committees. Maybe we invite a representative if we're going to put this on the agenda at some point.
I think that would be a very good idea because I do think that they have a different kind of vision in terms of, you know, pristinely manicured property with very specific types of plantings. And so, you know, again, if this is something that we want to implement, I think having them kind of re-envision what a kept town property looks like would be an important part of the equation.
Yeah, we want to collaborate with them. We don't want to blindside them.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
How about the Conservation Board? Are you on that? Aaron, weren't you on that, or isn't?
I used to be, I think Mitch is now,
Okay. Well, so that would be a good connection then, of course.
right?
Yeah, and speaking of the conservation board, and Mitch, you can probably speak to this, so you're more familiar with it. We are currently working with George Smith and members of the conservation board for an updated tree inventory for the town. So we've been working with a RIT student who developed a GIS survey collector application for us, and we're going to go out and start updating our tree inventories. And this all kind of spurred from last year when we looked at potential grants for tree maintenance and tree plantings and all of that. One of the components was that we needed an updated tree inventory. So that's one of the things that we've been working with. Just on a town staff level with the conservation board, thought you might be interested in knowing.
Yeah, George is looking into doing a tree inventory with through the tree council. It was supposed to be done this past spring, but COVID took away all of his workforce and he didn't feel comfortable having people get together and go out and about. But he does have we do have a pretty good system put in place to inventory tree height, width, species, health, that kind of thing. And we're in the current stages of doing a test run right now of how it might work. There's a pretty cool app that allows us to do it with GPS and all that kind of stuff. And then if it works out well, I think the plan is to really get after it in the spring.
All right, well, is there anything else that we need to discuss or should we wrap this up?
So the next meeting date's okay. Everybody's all good with October 7th, which is Wednesday, first Wednesday.
Yep.
And hopefully maybe we can get a socially distanced field trip in there in between. Or maybe we can divide and conquer a couple areas and some of us can look at a couple different areas and we could talk about what we saw. So that'd be great. All right, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Yes, motion to adjourn.
I second.
All right, all in favor?
Yeah,
Great to see you all. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, right.
Thank Everett. Thank you, Aaron.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.